Weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeit einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links 2, 3, drum links 2, 3, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links 2, 3, drum links 2, 3, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades, and welcome to a very special edition of Socialism Live. As you guys know, we are, for a couple more days, in the glorious month of May, and that means that our friends at Red May, which is a socialist group out in Seattle, is doing a series of presentations all month, and some of them they only do in person, but some of them, they're kind enough to stream online for us to partake of them as well. And I just think if they're going to be so nice and so gracious and provide all of this amazing content for us, then we just wouldn't be doing our jobs as the comrades that we are if we didn't take advantage of these opportunities to watch some of their streams live. So, well, the real Socialism Saturday is going to commence at 6 p.m. tonight. When we're doing Socialism Live, I am at the whim of when these people schedule their presentations, and the next presentation in Socialism or for Red May is going to start in about 11 minutes. And it is called How Not to Talk About Class. And I think it's a little interesting because, of course, Red May doesn't really like that we're doing this. They don't like that we're watching them. Apparently, we learned in our very first jaunt into this area that Red May believes that intellectual property is private property, which was a little surprising to me since they're not supposed to believe in private property, but we'll put that aside for the moment. There's nothing they can do to stop us from streaming their videos. It's just the way it goes. They can read, they can cry, they can complain, they can put slow mode in their chat, they can moderate people all they want, but we can still watch and we can still talk in this chat, and that's what we're going to do today. And in fact, on Twitter this morning, I posted a screenshot because one of and that Mao asshole, if he comes back in my chat, I'm gonna block him from now on. No socialists that are tattling are allowed in my chat. We don't mind normal socialists being in the chat. Like Autumn is a little entertaining. Autumn is like our pet socialist, but no one who's tattling is allowed in the chat. So if that Mao guy comes back, we're definitely gonna block him. But this guy tweeted earlier, or didn't tweet, he posted in Red May's chat earlier. Heads up, everyone. tomorrow, right-wing libertarian YouTuber Carlin Barasenko will be watching this segment with her audience. Be prepared if anything bad happens in the chat. Well, first of all, I'm not right-wing. Libertarian, true enough, fine. But contrary to popular belief, because apparently I heard on Twitter that I got kicked out of the Libertarian Party, which didn't happen. But that's another story for another day. Another story for another day. Oh, Autumn, are you sure that's the same guy? See, this is why we like having Autumn around. Autumn has helpful socialist intel. Autumn also could be lying. We can't, no offense, Autumn, but Autumn is a socialist, and therefore we should never assume that Autumn is telling the truth. Anyway, so they are lying about me because I'm not right wing. I'm extremely socially liberal. I just believe in private property. I know, crazy thought. But also, I want to be very clear, guys. Although I do have the link to this stream pinned at the top of our chat on YouTube, I just want to encourage everyone to not be disruptive in their chat. Please don't do it. Please don't be the people that they desperately want us to be. Listen, I'm a libertarian. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You are an adult. You are allowed to do whatever you want to do. I don't control you, but I am just asking very nicely to not be disruptive in their chat, to not shitpost. Definitely don't do it in my name. I don't co-sign that. If you're going to ask questions, I think it's fair. They actually finally, in the last one that we did, they finally asked one of my questions. I was so excited. I finally got a question in. I've probably watched more Red May presentations than like anyone. And I finally got a question in. I was very excited. So ask good questions. Ask good questions that are relevant to the presentation. I don't want to hear any, why are you engaging in capitalism if you're a socialist? I don't want to hear any of that. It's too easy. We already know the answer to it. It is beneath us, guys. It is beneath us. We do advanced socialism on this channel. We've been watching socialism regularly for like several effing months. And I just don't, I want us to be better, okay? Rise above. But you can go and chat if you want to. And we probably will provide most of the people watching this presentation today. I will say that. All right, guys. So that is going to get started in roundabout. Well, that's not what hang on. There we go. That is going to get started in roundabout 7 minutes or so. But we got a couple orders of business before that. Number one. This is like not even the real Socialism Saturday. I know it's Saturday and it might be confusing to people that there are two socialism streams, but no, Socialism Saturday starts at 6 p.m. And today we are doing a queer Marxism marathon because this week we discovered that the conservative Twitterati thinks they know what queer theory is, but really they have no effing idea what queer theory is at all. And so I thought I would put on a little bit of a marathon. I don't know how much we're going to watch, but I have like 87 queer Marxism presentations kind of waiting in my queue for me to look at and decide which ones I want to watch. And we're going to watch some queer Marxism this week. So hunker down, get several drinks, get some snacks. We're going to go for a while just to prove the point that we are so much better than the conservative Twitterati. It's not even funny. It's not even close. They are not even in the same league that we are. We sit through queer Marxism like on a weekly effing basis, mother effers. All right. So we're going to be watching that tonight at 6 p.m. Marcelo says, what could they possibly have to say? What could they possibly answer as a question that would not trigger them? Well, the point, Marcelo, is to listen to them and to understand their perspective. It is not to agree with them. It is not to disrupt them. It is not to debate them. I know you guys love this debate bro bullshit, but it accomplishes nothing. The point is to listen to them and understand their perspective and to ask clarifying questions to make sure we understand exactly and precisely what their perspective is. That's what we're doing here. Not nonsense. Okay? So we're doing a Queer Marxism Marathon at 6 p.m. today. Of course, we do have Socialism Bingo. Let me pop Socialism Bingo into the chat. What do you think that you're going to accomplish by going into their chat and telling them their perspective is nonsense? You're going to accomplish nothing. You're just going to make us look like jackasses. I'm asking you not to do it. It's time, guys, to, I know this is difficult for many of you, but sometimes we have to put on the big boy and girl pants and act like adults. And if you don't want to do that, then maybe go watch something else. Really not that hard. Anyway, put your socialism bingo card in the chat, click generate card. You get a free square in the middle. And if you're lucky, you get solidarity twice, because that's our little version of equity. Okay, I just haven't fixed the bingo card yet. But we're going for lines or corners. Shout out bingo if you get it. You won't win anything, but it keeps you entertained. It keeps you listening. All that good stuff. And let us know if you have a bingo. And once you get bingo, we're going for blackout bingo after that. Marcelo, you don't know what the F you're talking about, my friend. Stick around if you want to learn what you're talking about, but you don't know what the F you're talking about. I am sorry to break the news for you. Whoever influences you has failed you in that regard. Other orders of business, guys, is if you are not yet subscribed to my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com, I hope you will consider subscribing today. I have 2 stories on my Substack that I posted on early Friday morning in the wee hours of the morning at like 2 and 4 a.m. The first one is about Tufts University looking for non-binary 3-year-olds to study. That's one fresh hell right there. The other fresh hell, though, is that they're building a groomer middle school exclusively for trans and non-binary kids. This is going to be the most dystopian thing you see all week. It's going to be the most dystopian thing reported on the internet, unless I find something else in the next couple of days that defeats it. But definitely check it out. We are going to be talking about both of these articles on the stream on Monday. And if you appreciate what I'm doing and the original reporting that I'm bringing you, that no one else on the internet is bringing you, no matter what the Twitter horde says and whines and complains and all that stuff, no one else on the internet is bringing you the original reporting that I'm bringing you. No one else on the internet is exposing you to the dark dystopian underbelly like I am. It is the most unique unwoke content on the internet. I would put it up against anyone's. So make sure you're subscribed over at carlin.substack.com. And if you want to support the work I'm doing for $5 a month or $50 a year, I'm currently in a little bit of a fundraising drive because there are a couple of live events that I would like to go to and ideally have other people go to with me from the Unwoke Army to cover, to show you what they're talking about at their events, to show you their presentations, to show you their collaterals, to show you the vendors that are in the space. Sometimes this requires getting on a plane. Sometimes this requires hotel rooms. It requires stuff like that. If you guys appreciate this work I'm doing and you want to help me out, becoming a member at $5 a month, $50 a year will help me do it. We are currently 25% of the way to our goal. Roughly, I haven't checked today, but that's roughly what it was, which is really great because I've only been doing this for a couple days, but I want to bring in 200 more members. We need about 150 more, guys. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, this is the very best thing you can do to support it. And it helps me provide you with original journalism covering what's going on in their events. Listen, we cover the schools too. And contrary to popular belief, I do actually teach people about how to infiltrate the schools and find out what they're teaching. I know that lies, but like I woke up today and found out that apparently I'd scammed people out of money, but I didn't actually because I delivered the thing that they paid for. Anyway, another story. Never believe anything you hear on Twitter. But we are already doing the school stuff. The next step is to go even before the school stuff, which is the trainings, the conferences, the events. And that way we find out what is going to be making its way into the school system at any given moment. And again, support the work, $5 a month, $50 a year. I really do appreciate it. And when you support the work, you are going to be able to join us for our movie nights on Sundays, in addition to other perks that you get. Sunday night, tomorrow, 8 p.m., we are watching Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome as an homage to Tina Turner, or honoring the life of Tina Turner, in the supporter Discord at 8 p.m. The only way you can get access to the supporter Discord is by becoming a supporter of my work, either by becoming a member on the YouTube channel, joining my locals, joining my Patreon, or by getting that paid subscription on my Substack. And that really does help me out. All right, guys, let's get started. Let's get started. Looks like Red May is in the chat asking everyone to be respectful. Red May, we will be respectful, and we hope that you will play along. And they should be getting started any minute now, guys. Please mount that like button for me if you have not already. We do not smash the like button on this channel. We mount the like button on this channel like the warriors that we are. and mounting the like button lets people know to come and join us on the stream. I can tell you that YouTube has not sent out the notification on this stream because the numbers are a little low. That's okay. Hopefully more people will join us. But again, guys, the Real Socialism Saturday starts at 6 p.m. This is but a pregame. And then we're going to take a little bit of a break. And then we're going to come back. Let me see. Who do we have on docket for today? We have a professor at McGill University, that's in Canada. He is the author of Marx's Inferno, The Political Theory of Capital. We have Michael, an associate professor at Marquette. Isn't Marquette a Christian school, a Jesuit school? Marquette's a good school. And apparently Michael, the associate professor of sociology at Marquette University, is a socialist. And then we have Camilla, who is... dun, 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 Columbia University Law School. Columbia University, of course, is the home of the Frankfurt School. It is where the Frankfurt School set up when Marcuse came over to America in the 1930s, set up shop at Columbia University. And now Columbia University is actually the school that turns out the most woke Marxists of any university that I've ever seen, especially the teachers. Always be afraid of the teachers that Columbia is turning out. But today we have Camilla, who is a postdoctoral research scholar and lecturer at the Eric Holder Jr. Initiative for Civil and Political Rights at Columbia Law School, Marxist. Michael McCarthy, Associate Professor of Sociology at Marquette University, Marxist. William Clare Roberts, McGill University, Marxists everywhere, and not a drop to drink. I have another project that we're going to be undertaking as kind of a little side project where we're going to start. This is for the Unwoke Army, and if you want to be involved in this, let me know, because this is going to take just a lot of research. I want to put a list together of professors at public universities who are overt and openly Marxist and show the receipts for that. If you want to help me out with that, let me know. Send me an email at activelyunwoke@gmail.com, or I will be posting about it in the Discord and stuff like that. Getting started. All right, guys. Again, don't disrupt their chat, okay? Don't be the people they want you to be. Be better. I believe in you. Make good choices. Yeah, bot, you're gonna effing love this project. This project is gonna be so right up your alley. It's not even funny. You're probably gonna knock out like half of this project without even flinching. All right, guys, it's getting started. Shh. Hi, Sean.
For joining us today on this Saturday. Yes, Saturday morning.
Sean is the most handsome of all the socialists, I think.
We are winding down the
days. I don't know, Kyle's pretty handsome too.
Another great run.
We appreciate you, Sean.
Yesterday we had a great live conversation with Jules Boykoff, Cedric Johnson, and Sean Scott about pro sports and the ways in which left politics can interact in sports arena and in urban politics.
That's okay, Sid. You don't have to help if you don't want to.
We've had a great time getting together online and in person, and are looking forward to. Sorry, my dog is freaking out behind us. I don't know if anybody else can hear that, but that's great. We're just really looking forward to all the stuff moving forward.
Sean, can you show
we'll be
us
doing
your
a lot more
dog?
events throughout the year. Live online.
That'd actually probably
and in
be more
person.
entertaining than the
And
actual
hopefully
presentation,
we'll
right?
see a lot of you there. I'm going to do a quick list of some of the things we have going on tomorrow, which is at 3 p.m. No, at 11 a.m. We've got Bolivia and the New Pink Tide in Latin America.
We're not
Michael
watching
Hart,
that.
Jeff Weber and Sandra Mazadra.
We're not watching that.
And then at 3 p.m. we've got Money and Capital in the 21st Century.
Oh yeah,
Paul
I did want to watch that.
Jamie Merchant and
Socialism
Tony
Sunday.
Smith, who we've been trying to get here for a while. So very exciting. Thank you for joining us today for
Just
How
can't
Not
overlap
to
with
Talk
movie
About
night.
Class with Camila Vergara, William
Columbia,
Clare Roberts, and Mike McCarthy.
McGill, Marquette.
Camila Vergara is a postdoctoral research scholar and lecturer at the Eric H. Holder Jr. Initiative for Civil and Political Rights at Columbia Law School. A former journalist in Chile, she's the co-editor of Machiavelli on Liberty and Conflict, and is the author of Systemic Corruption, Constitutional Ideas for an Anti-Oligarchic Republic. William Clare Roberts teaches at McGill University. He is the author of Marx's Inferno, The Political Theory of Capital. His essays have appeared in Analyse und Kritik, 19th Century French Studies, the CLR James Journal, Contemporary Political Theory, Radical Philosophy, and Spectre. He's currently working on a book manuscript, which we're all excited to hear, A Radical Politics of Freedom, Domination, Ideology, and Self-Emancipation. And last, we have Mike McCarthy. Mike is an associate professor of sociology at Marquette University. He's the author of Dismantling Solidarity, Capitalist Politics and American Pensions Since the New Deal. He's an editor for the Journal of Critical Sociology, and he's just been named a member of the Theory Section Council at the American
Can you look up the Journal of Critical Sociology?
He's currently undertaking several projects, including a book on power, democracy, and finance, tentatively titled The Master's Tools, A Theory of Democratic Rupture, which is under contract with Verso Books. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you all. And thanks so much for being with us here today.
Just a little
Autumn, no tattling.
Addendum or amendment. I am not at the law school at Columbia, but at Cambridge, and actually soon out. So it was a little bit old. It was the second time that I was in Red May. So it was need to update your information, but it was all fine. So Mike, do you want to start?
Yeah, let's do it. Can I get those slides, please? Perfect. Thank you so much. First, I just want to say thank you so much to Sean and Phil and Red May for hosting this panel.
I appreciate it.
When Will reached out to me about it a few months ago, I was really, really excited, both because of the subject matter, but also because his own work is something I've been following for a while, but I haven't really had a chance to connect with him. So I was really excited about that. And then when I heard Camilla was going to be on the panel, I was doubly excited because her recent work in political theory has been really kind of informative to some stuff I've been doing.
No, Cambridge
on my
as
own,
in England. Cambridge
a book I have coming
University
out
of Cambridge,
next
whatever
year
it is.
with Verso on democratizing finances. It's informed in some ways by her approach to plebeian democracy. Plus, I think it was probably 15 years ago that Camilla and I were in a graduate seminar together at NYU. So it's really great to kind of reconnect.
That's because they're allowed to use the tools of the capitalist because they are surviving under capitalism.
I'm going to be talking today.
It's in the Communist Manifesto, so it's not actually hypocrisy in their ideology.
With Matthew Hikaru Dusan.
Oh, a paper. Oh, good.
Which we published in the last issue of the Journal of Sociological Theory. And the paper is titled "The Problem of Class Abstractionism," and it's actually part of a broader project that we've been working on. Although we both have our respective kind of solo projects that we're trying to finish up. This is part of a book project that we kind of imagine producing in the future at some point. So I'll just dive right into it. In the last decade, political movements around the world have breathed new life into an old idea in contemporary democracy, the idea of socialism. And with this renewed interest in wealth concentration and redistribution, class, once deemed discursively dead, has made a strong return to politics and the intellectual agenda. But as class analysis returns, so have familiar criticisms. In particular, today's advocates for robust class politics have found themselves accused of Marxism's supposed cardinal sin, class reductionism. But when we interrogate this concept a bit, we find deep ambiguity. To give you a sense of this ambiguity, I want to start with a quote from David Roediger's Wages of Whiteness. It's a highly influential critique of class reductionism from within the Marxist tradition. There, Roediger writes,
as a reminder, whiteness means capitalism.
Race to class is damaging. If to use tempting older Marxist images, racism is a large, low-hanging branch of a tree that is rooted in class relations, we must constantly remind ourselves that the branches of a tree are not the same as the roots.
This is when whiteness got redefined as capitalism, I promise you.
By grabbing the branches.
This could be like one of the
sources. Wages of Whiteness, Roediger means to criticize class reductionism generally.
In criticizing whiteness, they're criticizing class reductionism.
Raises the question of whether rejecting the primacy of class in political terms necessarily means rejecting it in terms of historical analysis, or if even these two things are actually distinct. Indeed, in his metaphor, Roediger suggests that class relations as the roots of the tree are more fundamental in a kind of structural sense, even if class is not necessarily more important in a political sense, in a sort of immediate conjunctural sense. That is, it sometimes makes more political sense to grab the branches in order to shake the roots, if the roots are class. Though Roediger himself ends up conflating these throughout his book, the quote above suggests that class reductionism can actually be broken down into two distinct claims, one about politics and strategy, and another about socio-historical explanation. Conceptually, in our paper, we break down the category of class reductionism by developing a distinction between what we call the political primacy of class and the structural primacy of class. Political primacy is the idea that class subjects are the only subjects of radical social transformation. To put this another way, this view argues that in the first instance, people must be mobilized on the basis of their own class subjectivities and identities in socialist politics. The structural primacy of class is the claim that class structure is causally unique and fundamental for socio-historical analysis in some way or another. These distinct claims about the primacy of class are typically conflated under the label class reductionism.
Whiteness does not mean skin color. Whiteness means capitalism.
About reduction in the strict sense. If this conflation has largely gone unremarked upon, this has become because the two claims of primacy are often presumed to be two sides of the same coin. Indeed, in the popular and intellectual debate, they're treated as being tightly bound to one another. But making the analytical distinction between the political and structural primacy of class suggests that, formally speaking, the two claims can exist in various combinations. And so in our paper, we begin to develop this, this 2x2 table. Folks that know me will know I love 2x2 tables. And in the top left cell, we basically have what we call relativism, which is the rejection of both the structural.
This is the scholarly research coming out of Marquette University.
Being a little format's wrong.
Marquette's the one in
Milwaukee. In the bottom right, we have an affirmation of both structural and political primacy of class. Now, typically, this is the axis upon which the debate over class reductionism unfolds. However, by breaking down class reductionism in this more multi-dimensional way, we can see that two additional cells emerge. One in which the political primacy of class is affirmed, but structural primacy of class denied, and one in which the structural primacy of class is affirmed, but political primacy of class denied. We call these constructivism and dynamism. Now, we think that part of a core aspect of Marxism is some commitment to the structural primacy of class. And so in this talk, because this is read May, I'm not really going to go into relativism and constructivism too much, but instead I'm going to spend the bulk of my time thinking about the distinctions and differences between what we call class abstractionism and class dynamism. Now, when we think of class reductionism, we mostly think of this bottom right cell. This cell has historically been associated with what we call orthodox Marxism, which conceived of the growing political subjectivity of the working class in a kind of naturalistic way. This view isn't really elaborated by Marx, but instead by central figures of the early 20th century socialist movements, such as Karl Kautsky. In this orthodox view, the political subjectivity of the working class is the outcome of their growth and homogenization as capitalism develops. In this way, orthodox Marxism assumes that collective action on the basis of class directly expresses the structure of capitalism itself. In other words, orthodox Marxism claims to derive the political primacy of class from an account of its structural primacy. Of course, the predictions of class homogenization have been proven empirically wrong and quite reductive. But more recently, there have been attempts by Marxists to elaborate non-reductive versions of this argument. Recently, Marxist sociologist Vivek Chivar has mounted a defense of the primacy of class, both in his 2017 Catalyst article, Rescuing Class from the Cultural Turn, but also in his recent 2022 book, The Class Matrix. Here, what I want to do is reconstruct the argument in his book, The Class Matrix, in order to motivate our discovery of the fourth cell, the class dynamism cell. His book, The Class Matrix, essentially attempts to explain why capitalism is so durable despite being so exploitative. Against the post-war left, Chibber revives this neo-orthodox view I was just talking about to give an interest-based explanation of capitalist stability. What I want to do here is lay out what I see, and these are in our terms. He doesn't put this, he doesn't state it in this way in his book, but I want to lay out what I see as the book's core theses to show how he comes to this conclusion. And we label these theses the class difference thesis, the capitalist reproduction thesis, and the class formation thesis.
My aunt and uncle just bought two golden
Here,
Trump
Chibber
mugs,
makes an argument
and
about
I'm really
what makes
happy
class
about it.
structurally fundamental. This is his argument for structural primacy. What does Chibber mean essentially by class structure in his book? He conceptualizes class as the employment relation, broadly conceived. Capitalist class structure is made up of owners of productive resources on the one hand, that is capitalists, and on the other hand, owners of labor power, that is workers. Within this polarized class structure, workers are dependent on capitalists for their access to the means of subsistence, wages, and are therefore compelled to sell their labor power to survive. Capitalists, on the other hand, are compelled by competitive pressures to exploit their workers if they are to survive on the market. For Chibber, what makes this class structure primary is that it alone is the only social relation that directly bears on people's material well-being. And I quote, "The peculiarity of class resides in the fact that it's the only social relation that directly governs the material well-being of its participants. Other social relations or social structures, we are led to believe, do not." This is the structural primacy argument in the book. Next is what we call the capitalist reproduction thesis. Following his case for class's structural causal primacy is the claim that the reproduction of capitalism is secured through the immanent workings of that class structure, the employment relation. For Chibber, the risk-reward matrix of employment leads workers essentially to become resigned to their situation and to not choose to resist. Perhaps tellingly, Chibber focuses exclusively on labor strikes.
No, I'm just
kidding.
When it comes to participating in a strike, don't do that. I'm kidding.
Workers are vulnerable to being fired. They need to agree on what the strike itself is even for, and they can always opt to free ride. Because if they don't participate, but it's successful, they're still going to benefit from the outcome. In short, collective action for strikes comes with a lot of costs for individuals. In his view, workers typically accept their class role as workers instead of rejecting it via the strike because they see no other viable option.
Why don't they just reject their
Not
role
because they're
and start
blind
their
to
own
their
business?
own domination by ideology.
They could reject their role as
This makes
proletariat
Chibber's
at any time and
neo-orthodox
start
argument
their own
quite
damn
distinct
business.
from the orthodox view that I laid out before.
You don't need a large investment of
Whereas
capital to start
orthodox
your own
Marxism
business now.
bakes
That was like
the
100
class
years ago.
politics into the theory of class structure itself. Chibber turns this around and argues that class structure is the primary barrier to class formation in class politics. And so that's his capitalist reproduction thesis. Next is his class formation thesis, his third and final one. If the capitalist class structure does not predict collective action or class struggle, but rather individual accommodation and resignation, then what force can overcome this structurally built-in conservatism? Chibber's class formation thesis argues that for workers to engage in class collective action, the indispensable ingredient, in his terms, is cultural. To opt into struggle, workers must change their meaning orientations from individualistic to solidaristic. Class formation in this view is ultimately a collective action
their
problem.
orientations from individual to collective. And this problem can only be solved by cultivating cultures of solidarity that help workers build relationships with each other as workers, and a sense of shared purpose as workers. In order to make them comrades, they have to get them to stop thinking of themselves as individuals.
Contingent, but the form of collective action as class formation workers versus capitalists, is structurally determined. So what does this mean for my 2x2 table that I mentioned earlier? Chibber's rescuing of class can be read as an attempt to reground the political primacy of class in an account of its structural primacy. And the question is, does he succeed? My answer to that is no. His argument hinges on an unduly abstract conception of class structure. This exemplifies the real problem with attempts to ground the political primacy of class in an account of its structural primacy, which has less to do with reductionism and more to do with what we call abstractionism. At the center of Chibber's account is actually a bit of a sleight of hand. His theory promises a reflection on the enduring significance of class in an era when many people, including workers, are drawn to alternative modes of political identification, especially ethno-nationalist or racial identifications. Given this political context that we're in, we might expect a theory of how processes of collective identification and mobilization can coalesce around class as opposed to other social bases. But the theory does not consider class formations against other formations. Instead of actually deriving political primacy from structural primacy, class abstractionism, in fact, proceeds backwards. It presupposes the political primacy of class and posits an abstract conception of the class structure in a way that confirms its initial premise. And this involves two key theoretical errors. First, what we call a horizontal conflation, or the conflation of class structure with all social structure as such, that class determination actually stands in for structural determination. That class is the only meaningful structural basis for political mobilization is actually assumed from the start, with the result that class formation also comes to stand in for collective action.
Class is the only meaningful basis for political mobilization.
Is markedly economistic. Everything takes place within the sphere of work, but no attention is paid to how economic conflicts are translated into the political sphere via things like party politics. Indeed, when you read this, there's hardly a place for socialist politics in general. Second, we identify what we call a vertical conflation, or the conflation of class structure at its most abstract level, workers versus capitalists, for instance, for the entire matrix of class interests in which workers are themselves embedded. By ignoring that we can understand class interests at actually multiple levels, industry, occupation, firm, and so on, class abstractionism treats the class structure as a simple one-dimensional mold to be filled by collective action. It assumes a preset form of class struggle. Even at the level of class, though, class actors can mobilize into a wide range of class formations. They might be craft unions, such as the ASL, protecting sort of privileges, or they might be industrial unions, such as the IWW, or they might be a whole range of other types of class formations. This is the key. In making both errors, class abstractionism thereby assumes away the central issue of class formation, namely why it takes the particular form that it does within a given conjuncture, and under what circumstances it might transcend immediate corporate interest and take a broader political character. What Chibber shares with the orthodox Marxist view that I presented is the pretension to justify the political primacy of class. In other words, the notion that class subjects are the necessary subjects of radical social transformation in terms of the structural primacy of class at this abstract level. This, I would argue, is the fundamental flaw of what Dylan Riley has recently termed late
Autumn, I'm not communicating with you anymore in that chat. If you want to talk to me,
so in mapping out this conceptual space, we believe that class abstractionism is deeply flawed and simply cannot be
Autumn's showing that Autumn thinks that all businesses are run via factory, which is just fundamentally untrue.
Altogether.
Vast majority of businesses don't have factories.
A logically coherent alternative to class abstractionism is indeed available within Marxism. And this takes us to the lower left quadrant of the 2x2 class.
This Marquette University professor is really effing excited about Marxism. Like, really effing excited.
Okay, cool.
I wonder if Marquette University knows how excited their professor is about Marxism. I'm sure they do. They're good Jesuits.
My elaboration of the cell class dynamism really rests on three interlocking theses that each invert the core arguments of class abstractionism. What we call the class dynamism thesis, the conjunctural class structure thesis, and the multiple subjectivities thesis. Whereas class abstractionism offers a static understanding of class structure, we need a dynamic one. Where it offers an abstract understanding of class structure, we need one that's also conjunctural. Where it only concerns itself with people's class identity, we need a theory of multiple subjective bases for politics. Taken together, these inversions form an argument for what makes class primary in structural terms. Marxism lives on, while showing that it can't be primary in political terms. I'll try to move through this kind of quickly. Let's first just discuss the class dynamism thesis. It's necessary to abandon that sort of abstract view of class structure. And to do so, we need a different explanation of the structural primacy of class. Remember, Chibber's explanation was that class structure is primary because it alone directly determines people's interest. We think that is basically erroneous. Because there are all sorts of different social structures that directly determine people's interest. I mean, citizenship being the most. You could gender, citizenship. We could go into details here, but we think that claim is erroneous. But instead, we still do think that what makes class primary in structural terms is that it's actually the only social relation shaping what people need to do to survive that contains an endogenous mechanism, capitalist market competition, that actually imparts on it a dynamic developmental logic, uneven growth, and differentiation of the working class. Such dynamism drives technical change, it drives the spread of capitalism into non-capitalist spaces, the concentration of capital into bigger enterprises, the elaboration of a division of labor, the creation of class fractions, innovations, new products, and so on. And of course, new forms of exploitation and oppression. And this is no Marxist axiom. Even the staunchest neoclassical economists would agree that capitalist market relations are dynamic. And so this is essentially key. Capitalist developmental dynamics do not produce increased class homogenization, as Kautsky suggested they would. And as class abstractionism takes as a static structural fact. Competition instead generates increased differentiation within the working class. And this is quite important because class abstractionism assumes a fundamentally interchangeable set of interests for all workers, right? But when we think of the working class as being more internally differentiated, we get a different view. Our second thesis is the conjunctural class structure thesis. To understand how this differentiation at the level of class might bear on politics, and on class formations, it's necessary to lower the level of generality of class structure down from class abstractionism's highly polarized class map. And this is where our conjunctural class structure thesis comes into view. Levels of abstraction are somewhat related to what we call in Marxism the method of successive approximations. They concern the formation of concepts, and concepts such as workers are actually a crucial building blocks in social theory because they're the basic data containers that we use to fill with our observations. But all concepts have a hierarchical structure. For example, from biology, I'm a human and I'm also a mammal. Class abstractionism views the class structure in a highly undifferentiated, one-dimensional way, which treats the individual members of abstract classes as essentially having interchangeable interest sets. Not only does this gloss over the vast amount of Marxist literature stretching back at least 100 years on the various intermediate class strata and their relation to the politics of socialist transformation, more importantly, it ignores how the complexities of class structure at lower levels of abstraction are crucial to socialist politics. In other words, the class structure does not provide a one-dimensional mold with which class formation fills. Its existence at multiple scales allows for a variety of class formations beyond the simple binary of individual resignation and collective action posited by Chibber. In a move from the abstract to the concrete, it's necessary to incorporate additional factors. And so we might think about the ways in which different authority structures or different skill structures are sort of incorporated into the working class life to create differentiations among the working class. But this is the basic point. The result of lowering the level of abstraction is a more differentiated and conjunctural political terrain. And this is actually the foundation upon which actual class politics emerge. People's actual reality, sadly, not the reality of sort of an abstract, highly theoretical view of working class life.
Thank you, Reagan.
And this is, I'll just end on this final one.
I'm sorry they taught you those lies.
Subjectivities thesis. This thesis argues that the conjunctural dynamism of class bears directly on the development of people's changing subjectivities.
Reagan, if you can send me that lesson, that would be great.
In other words, their identities and how those identities are actually mobilized into political action. Workers don't simply confront work as workers abstractly conceive.
How their identities are mobilized into political action. There's a massive amount
of literature and history showing that for everybody from industrial ethnographers to historians, that gender, skill, race, citizenship all bear on how managers seek to control workers and how workers mobilize in class formations.
Gender, skill, race,
class
all seek on how managers control workers.
Fall from view as irrelevant to a story of class struggle. Yet for someone principally interested in class politics, as any Marxist of course is, there's no small problem if non-class structures and subjectivities are relevant to collective action along class lines.
They're equating class and race,
the book,
class and
The
gender,
Ideology of Power
class and identity.
Power of Ideology by Goran Therborn is actually quite useful in
conflating them just like whiteness and capitalism.
In the book, Therborn develops this theory of subjection qualification and shows that the way in which people's social structures, both class but also non-class social structures, change the ways in which there are social affirmations that are rewards for certain kinds of behaviors and social sanctions that are punishments for certain kinds of behaviors that people confront in their daily lives. And these changes, both at the class and non-class level, change people's subjectivities. It's these changing subjectivities across a whole range of identity bases, class and non-class, that are the source of political formations. And this is well known in social movement theory. Everybody from Francis Fox Pittman to Doug McAdam have shown that the perceptions of aggrieved populations, as they change as a result of breakdowns in institutions and new political opportunities, are the raw materials of new social movement formations. So this then, and I'm wrapping up here. This then brings us back to the presumed entailment of the political primacy of class by the structural primacy of class. Neo-Orthodox Marxism presumes that the political primacy of class is entailed by its structural primacy. It does this by defining class structure in highly abstract and static terms, and two, by arguing that class structure alone directly determines people's interests. But having just defended the structural primacy of class on the basis of its dynamism, we now have a basis for an argument against the view that class subjectivity is primary, even for class formation itself. When a strike is called, people can be mobilized on the basis of many subjectivities: worker, but also father, mother, member of a religious group, undocumented, and so on. And worker itself is not a simple mold to be filled. Many aspects of a worker's life. He's saying
that class is the same as identity. All the different identity groups that they use to stir people up to destabilize the system.
Or other forms of political action. Class abstractionism fails to address this. It offers instead a hollow and simplistic view of little use in explaining actual politics. It kills, I think, what's living in Marxism. Why does the structural primacy of class not entail the political primacy of class at a subjective level? Here's the basic key. Because of class differentiation, our political starting point is a population already divided and segmented into different subjective groups, making different claims to resources and power. It is not, as class abstractionism suggests, a population that already principally understands its interest in abstract class terms, but opts out of collective action.
No, they redefine the term. It's not the same thing. Related, perhaps, but not the
perspective of class abstraction fundamentally misunderstands our social reality in this way. and has no good theory for why people are already mobilized in collective action on the basis of non-class groupings. And it has no good theory for what that means for the object of its own analysis, class formation. It offers no insight into perhaps the largest mass collective action in US history, Black Lives Matter, a movement which has in part demanded redistribution in the form of reparations. Indeed, class abstractionism offers no insight into the civil rights movement as a whole, or how that movement transformed from a movement for political rights for Black people into a poor people's campaign. We can't forget that Martin Luther King died fighting for democratic socialism in Memphis. Was that not class formation?
They're trying to say class is the same as race, is the same as gender, is the same as sexuality, is the same as gender identity.
Therefore, to defend the class primacy in structural terms,
they're expanding Marxism outside of just the class
that it's actually necessary to reject it, class primacy,
because it's all the same. They're saying. So why don't we just think about all these groups as different classes or intersectionality?
Class abstractionism puts the cart before the horse, presuming the political primacy of class, when in fact there's no grounds for such a guarantee in politics. To return to Roediger's imprecise language, depending on the conjuncture, it might be necessary to grab the branches in order to shake the roots. And I will end there. Thank you so much for the extra time.
That's actually really important because I'm asked all the time why Marxists don't focus more on
Mike.
Class. That's why.
So
they think class
I really
is
wanted
the same
to do
as
this.
race, is the same as gender, is the
Mike
same as trans, is the same as whatever.
I was so happy because they were. So I think the concept of class abstractionism is an incredibly useful one, and it's something that
he read his own paper.
Like I've been wrestling with Chibber's approach to class politics for a while, and I have a long review of Chibber's book, and I sort of wish that I'd read Mike and Matthew's essay before I wrote that review, because I think some of things that I tried to say there would have been a lot clearer if I had already read Mike and Matthew. So what I today is I guess I sort of think I'm sort of the bridge here. Like I feel like Mike gave us theory, and I think Camila will bring politics, and I'm going to try to bridge the two, and I'm going to do it in the following way. I want to talk through an essay that I just published in Crisis and Critique. It just came out last week.
Can we look that up, please, Bob? Crisis and Critique.
Like Class in Theory, Class in Practice. So I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to talk through part of the argument and kind of motivate what I'm trying to do there in a way that I think jumps off from what Mike just said pretty well. Like I said, I think Mike and Matthew's concept of class abstractionism and the way in which they articulate it is really helpful. It seems like a useful name to identify this particular conjunction between the claim about the structural primacy of class and the claim about the political primacy of class. Now, I think the way, though, that I talk about class abstractionism is going to depart a little bit from how Mike talks about it, in part because like it intersected with things that I was already already percolating. So the way I think about this is I like class abstractionism as a name much better than class reductionism, because I think class reductionism is fundamentally, it's a straw man, like as a name. Like the sorts of people that we're talking about, Adolf Reed, Vivek Chibber, they're not reductionists. They don't believe that racist or misogynist or transphobic domination reduced to class power or are merely epiphenomenal on class power. Rather, they think that the primary structural and causal processes of our society are rooted in class. And they think that appealing to class is the most effective way to address racist, misogynist, etc. Policies and practices, right? So and maybe this is a place where I depart. I'm kind of sympathetic to certain aspects of this, right? I mean, as with Mike, I do think that class processes are structurally basic. That's like the Marxist explanatory program has always been, like, to me, incredibly revelatory, and I think it's incredibly important, something we need to hold on to. So I'm very sympathetic to that notion of the structural primacy of class. But I'm also kind of sympathetic in a certain way to saying that there's a primacy of class politics, in the sense that, I mean, I would love to see an explicitly proletarian political movement, explicitly proletarian political project, and I think that only
the
an explicitly proletarian political project could actually, like, handle the freight train of crises that are bearing down on us, or that are already running over us. So in that sense, like, I'm like, yeah, let's go.
Thank you, McGill University professor, with your desire for the dictatorship
Mike
of the proletarian.
Matthew are right to call this particular articulation abstractionist, and I think they're right in a very basic way. Like, I think that this tendency on the left, and I think it's an important tendency. I think it's maybe the most vocal tendency since 2016. I think this tendency has an abstract conception of class, both theoretically and politically. I think it's a concept of, they operate with a concept of class that they arrive at by a sort of simplistic abstraction, and then that concept they take and try to mobilize politically, also in a very abstract way. So what do I mean by that? I keep saying the word abstract, but what do I mean?
It's a good question.
I think that this conception of class is abstract in that it tries to arrive at universality by stripping away anything that seems particular or narrow or sectarian. Right? So I think that on this way of thinking, right, class politics and universalistic politics are identical, and the identity consists in appealing to what we have in common. And I think you can find statements like this, statements that apply this, in a number of Chibber's pieces, in some of Reed's pieces, and in a lot of the pieces that are published, Jacobin and that sort of thing. So I think, and this is going to pick up on something that Mike said in his presentation, which I think is exactly right, about the way in which capitalist dynamism doesn't homogenize but differentiates. So my basic intuition here is that what we have in common is precisely what divides us against one another. And that, I think, is the thing that class abstractionism can't grasp. And what that thing is market competition, right? It's actually market competition that is fundamental to the unity of the capitalist working class, the proletariat. But it's precisely that market competition that divides the class against itself. And I think that this way in which what unites us is also what divides us runs right through any theoretical understanding of capitalism, and I think it's crucial. So in that sense, I think this is the basic intuition that's sort of having my argument. I think that we as socialists actually have a very hard time taking seriously enough the fact that class relations in capitalism are market-mediated relations. And by take seriously enough, I mean, I think it could be really hard to cash out all of the implications that has for our theoretical and political language. So first of all, I mean, obviously, the wage relation, the relation between capital and labor is itself a market-mediated relation, right? So exploitation is carried out via a relationship in the workplace that is
how is it exploitative? You agree to the job.
I hire myself out to a boss.
Yes.
Right? So that part's
and agree to a salary.
Enough.
It's not exploitation.
It's
a voluntary arrangement
in
which you barter your labor for a salary.
Intraproletarian relations. Intraproletarian relations are themselves relations of competition in the labor market. That's what identifies someone else as a fellow proletarian, that they too are selling themselves in order to access the means of subsistence. And finally, intra-capitalist relations are also relations of competition.
These people really just think that bosses are like sitting around smoking cigars and drinking like whiskey all day,
including the labor market, and also in the markets where goods are sold. And I think that when we don't incorporate that into our account of class, and I think this is what goes wrong with the class abstractionist account, we end up conflating class relations and work relations. That is, we end up modeling the capitalist economy as a whole on the individual work site, whether it's a factory or a farm or whatever, a Walmart. What does that mean? Well, I think that means that we act as if the capitalists are all part of one management team, okay? And we act as if proletarians are all fellow workers who could meet up directly, organize, and confront the boss over pay and working conditions. And those things aren't true. The relations of market competition amongst workers differentiate the capitalist working class and pit the working class against itself in all sorts of ways. The interests of one group of workers are going to be contrary to the interests of other groups of workers.
Right.
And that is true at the level
of all groups in humanity
class as well. The interests of this group of capitalists are going to be contrary to, opposed to this group of capitalists. And therefore, when there is struggle at the political level on this terrain, it's always going to be a question of, well, which fraction of the working class and which fraction of the capitalist class are aligned in various ways. And I think that's sort of the basic intuition that's behind my essay, and the thing that I think I really picked up on from Mike and Mathieu's essay. I think the consequence of this is important, because I think what happens in the class abstractionist picture is that the appeal to an abstract
They answered one last week.
The attempt to arrive at universal interests by finding, well, what is it that we all have in common that we can construct a set of universal interests around, ends up becoming a Swiss cheese universal.
This guy's literally just making
when
shit
we
up.
look
this
for
whole thing is a
what
giant
we
word
all
salad.
have in common,
what
we often end
we have
up
things
with
in common, but we don't, and we can work together, but we can't.
Universalistic set of claims that can have surprising holes in them, that can leave out certain groups of people precisely because they're not taking account of particularity.
I know.
So this is just kind of a canned example, but Medicare for All was absolutely central to the Bernie campaigns. It was central to, I think, the resurgence of democratic socialism in the U.S. I think it was an incredibly important sort of rallying cry.
First important thing he said this entire presentation.
However, I do think that it functions in a certain way as a rallying cry because it postpones certain decisions, certain conflicts that I think are really actually important, right? So does Medicare for All include trans healthcare, right? If it doesn't,
that's the difference
then
right there.
It's not really for all, right? Does Medicare for all include abortion care? Does Medicare for all include health care for immigrants, whether they are documented or not? Does it involve policing at the point of access, whether or not people are eligible for accessing care? These are the sorts of questions that can't be decided simply on the basis of the abstract universal. But it's those cases, those political issues that are going to determine whether or not Medicare for all is actually Medicare for all.
The construction of my abortion shrine.
So I'm gonna close out by reading a little chunk of what I wrote in the essay that sort of drives off from this. So up till now, I've sort of just been using this in a very loose way, but I want to get into things a little bit more precisely.
Abortion.
Alternative. I mean, I think that every form of working class politics necessarily begins someplace specific, right? It begins with the particular complaints, the aspirations of a more or less clearly bounded set of working class people. And linking these proletarians with their complaints and their aspirations to others is never going to be a simple matter, right? The fact that
someone's banging on his door
from the Jacobin article, the working class consists of everyone whose survival depends on wage labor, including people of all races, gender, sexual orientations, and immigration statuses, close quote. This does not mean that the working class has a broadly unified set of interests, but precisely the opposite. That the working class is profoundly divided by the local concerns of its myriad fractions.
What is the hammering?
Increasing the price of my labor power may decrease the price of yours. Taxing these profits to fund those public works may make this working class community better off and that working class community less secure. Right? And I think this is where the conflation of class relations and work relations steps in to make everything simpler for the class abstractionist, right? Whether it's electoralism or union organizing that's being pursued, work relations provide a convenient for class relations, a sort of model, a scale model, or what's taken to be a scale model. Right. The result of this is claims like wage exploitation means that the interests of the whole working class and the capitalist class are diametrically opposed. That's also from an article in Jacobin. So there's a fiction at work here, and it's a soothing fiction. The fiction is that the diversity of the proletariat is transcended by their opposition to capitalists, just as the diversity of employees in any particular firm might be overcome by an organized opposition to the exploitation of their one employer. But it's not true. The interests of fractions of the proletariat align with the interests of fractions of the capitalist class constantly, in part because the capitalist class does not have a common interest in exploiting labor power. Right? The defining characteristic of capitalist society is that the various capitals are related to one another by market competition, not by class collaboration. Right? Capitalist employer A does not have an interest in capitalist employer B extracting more surplus labor from B's workforce. Capitalist employer B extracting more surplus labor may well be a threat to capitalist employer A. An individual firm is hierarchically arranged and organized for the pursuit of a particular interest. Capitalism, however, is not. And so I think this confusion between the structure of the economy and the structure of the firm, it not only lulls the class abstractionist into a false sense of security, it also prepares the way for something that's more pernicious. The assumption that the interests of the proletariat can be identified by generalizing from the interests of some identified fraction of proletariat. Right? If being
Are you
exploited
suggesting that people's
entails
interests
that
are
the interests of the
individual
whole
and
working
not
class are
collective?
coherent,
Because that doesn't sound very
the
Marxist
whole
to me.
proletariat cannot be observed all at once, then it's going to be tempting to identify the interests of some particular group of proletarians who can be observed and to treat them like a scale model of the entire class. I think the result of this operation can be seen recently in Matt Karp's has a response to Dylan Riley and Robert Brenner's piece on 7 Theses in NLR. And Karp there, he draws this contrast between Hibbing, Minnesota, a mining town in the northern range, and North Oaks, which is a former gated community north of the Twin Cities. And Hibbing was once a center of labor militancy, stronghold of the Democratic Party, but it broke for Trump in 2016 and 2020. North Oaks, which has long been home to the wealthiest families in Minnesota, was a Republican fortress until 2016 when it voted for Clinton, right? So what are we to make of this transformation of the Democratic Party from the party of Hibbing to the party of North Oaks? Karp argues that the left has largely abandoned the interests of the people of Hibbing in favor of the interests of the people of North Oaks. So there's a little quote
is too
from
capitalist
Karp.
for them.
He says, left-wing attacks on supposed nostalgia for the historic working class or celebrations of some new or actual working class, i.e. that portion which already votes against Republicans, offers little more than a chic articulation of the actually existing politics of the Democratic National Committee. The parallel tracks of liberal and left-wing thought on the subject are not accidental, since the organized electoral left today draws breath exclusively in districts dominated by Democrats. Any way forward for the American left will require a cold reckoning with the forces that have landed so many of the politicians, activists, and intellectuals in opposition to the miners and retail workers of Hibbing, Minnesota, and in a de facto alliance with the current occupants of James J. Hill's Manor Estate. Okay, I mean, it's a nice polemic, but I think it rests on a fiction, right? It rests that the interest class are diametrically opposed
socialist internet
to the interests of the whole capitalist class. After all,
in
the
Trudeau's
politicians,
Canada,
the
all
activists,
internet
the
is
intellectuals
socialist.
who find themselves in opposition to the miners and retail workers of Hibbing are, by this same criteria, in alliance with the textile workers and gas station attendants of Minneapolis and St. Paul, right? Why is it that the workers of the 4th and 5th congressional districts in Minnesota are less indicative than the workers of the 8th district? I think the only fair reading of this situation is that the working class is divided against itself, and that the mutually opposed fractions of the proletariat have allied themselves politically and culturally with different fractions of the capitalist class, right? Karp is correct that celebrations of the urban fraction of the working class, the fraction that already votes against Republicans, are largely facile, right? I think they certainly do nothing to bridge the electoral guide between urban service sector workers and rural workers, right? Who are more.
Why are college professors spending their Saturday trying to figure out how to get people to vote against Republicans?
Workers, right?
Why are college professors
and at their
in
worst,
Canada
these sort of celebrations of the urban fractions of working class replicate what I call the slow motion Stalinism of Obama era liberalism. When people really convinced themselves that demographic trends were busy electing a new people, and that this was going to usher in a permanent Democratic majority of cosmopolitan and upwardly mobile urbanites. Right? In fact, I think the truth is nearly the opposite. Left-leaning parties in first-past-the-post electoral systems like the US, like Canada, where I am, they face an uphill battle precisely because their base constituencies are concentrated in urban areas. It's inefficient from the perspective of electoral politics, since left-leaning parties, then they rack up huge wins in urban districts and lose a whole bunch of suburban and rural districts by smaller margins and end up getting.
Oh, look, Bot's making friends with Sean in the chat. Isn't that nice?
But we should not think that the Democrats' loss of miners and retail workers in Hibbing, Minnesota granting for a moment that this is actually real, CARP plays loose with the numbers a little bit, like this loss of Hibbing was incredibly close. That must be reckoned with if we're to find, or sorry, when we portray this electoral crisis as the crisis that we have to reckon with if we're going to find a way forward for the American left, I think that puts the cart before the horse. The Democratic coalition in the US is running on fumes from organizational work and institution building that took place decades ago.
That's
in 2016,
kind of true,
Democratic
actually.
vote
Correct,
share
kind of.
More strongly correlated with where manufacturing was strong in 1920 than it is where manufacturing is happening in 1910 or in 2010. So, and in fact, it's negatively correlated with where manufacturing was happening.
But it's only because the socialists have taken over the party.
So, in other words, like institutions that were built 100 years ago are still helping Democrats today. And there are no institutions that have been built in the last 30 years or the last 50 years that are doing the same sort of thing, right? In other words, many workers in the United States are doing the equivalent of voting for Eisenhower because Lincoln won the war, right? They're voting on the basis of a memory, right? And no memory is going to last forever.
No, I'm just fucking around.
So it's actually the sclerosis,
I'm messing
the
around.
destitution of those old institutions, and the failure to build new organizations in this new landscape of service worker dominance that explains the inability to build an electoral coalition at the left, not the other way around, right? So therefore, I think the problem with treating any fraction of the proletariat as an image of the working class as a whole is that it just oversimplifies this problem. It oversimplifies the problem of passing from class analysis to class politics by running together features of the structural class relations that are basic to capitalism, between capitalist and proletarian, and features of one or another work relation, right, between the miners of Hibbing and the Oliver Mining Company, for example. Class abstractionists make the political task of socialism seem much easier than it really is, right? Class politics takes on this sort of palpable immediacy of work relations, while it still holds on to this glow of the universal scope of class relations. And I think that we need to resist to that really easy, facile way
There's a nice interaction.
Building institutions from the ground up is going to take fighting on many fronts. And it's not a matter of finding like the universal message that's going to like tap into the interests that we all have in common. Those interests have to actually be built from the ground up. So thank you all. And thank you, Mike and Matthew. I look forward to hearing what Camilla has to say.
Stay out of US politics, Will. Stay in Canada.
So as you said before, I kind of close this.
She's the one I'm excited to hear from.
Expository part, bringing a little bit more politics, but kind of making the bridge also with theory. So from the radical Republican perspective, from which I see things, and very institutional and constitutional perspective, I go back to the Roman examples because class was really a structuring factor
She's not American.
Class in relations in the Roman Republic, and this it is before Marxism, right? So in a way, it is before capitalism.
Not saying the Republican Party.
That Marx was
different thing.
Looking into, was very keen into understanding class relations in Rome, and basically class, as Mike and Will have said, class is a social relation that is structured and is determined by a specific conjuncture, right? By a specific order, right? In which we are. We do not exist outside, and we are always in relation. And for me, if we're going to abstract class, we need to do the abstraction at least from that perspective, from the original, class that is more expansive than the conception of working class that we have today. or at least the working conception that we have, that we are trying to change. This abstraction, I think, it needs to be tied to materialism, to the life experience of workers or of that a group in society, and cannot just be detached as some kind of principles or specific experience. So for me, at least, the class as a social relation is based on at least 4 features that are interrelated. The first one is socioeconomic inequality. Basically, that is the material difference of economic power that translates into political power. But that kind of a structure, and of course, the more inequality there is in a society, the more the class relation will be deepened in a way, and more. It would be more probable that a class consciousness or class liberation, as McAdam would put it, or a cognitive liberation, would arise from this
cognitive liberation.
Increased contradictions.
It's about changing the psychology before
the socioeconomic inequality, you have that is not the same as this, but it's the life experience of the people in the precarity and oppression. So one thing is the socioeconomic inequality, kind of like the measurement or the gap between the rich and the poor, and the other is the real life experience of people in this relation, right? And that I'm going to talk a little bit about this life experience today, but just in the abstraction. So what is shared in a way in this group? And then is the experience of dependence on the one hand, and we can call it subalternity, this kind of status or condition that even if you are formally free, you are really dependent either on your employer or your master, right, or your husband, or there is a kind of a relation of dependence that I think crosses way more through the economic only part. It is really the social comes in and is tied. And we need to remind ourselves that marriage is really a socioeconomic institution, right? And it's a form of slavery from an ancient point of view.
Marriage is a form of slavery
in order to be productive and domestic laborers. So in a way, this
wow.
And I completely reject this idea that we cannot really organize around gender, or that class has a primacy vis-a-vis the other forms of domination that exist. They're all interconnected, right? And the last feature is exclusion or / the lack of privilege. Because today, we say that people are excluded from the political system. We are really not normally, formally.
On a good day.
Go and vote, right? But we lack privilege in the sense that we are today second-class citizens. We do not have the same access to justice.
You're a second-class citizen.
The same access to advancement, to healthcare, you name it. We have different accesses to basic services and to the things that the state provides. So it is exclusion and the lack of privilege. And of course, this is what the class, what we call today the working classes, but for me, it's the plebeian class, the plebeian subject in a way, is what this subject shares in a way, these 4 features. But they not share it only, it is not only that what they share that makes it a class, but also what they are not. So basically, the plebeian class in the Roman Republic were all the citizens who were not nobles. So in a way, if you were a Roman citizen and did not have any aristocratic pedigree, you were immediately as a plebeian, and you were allowed to participate in the plebeian assembly and make decisions and basically be part of the multitude, right? Of the multitude that was a political subject. And very interestingly, in the Roman Republic, plebeians were the ones who would control the boundaries of citizenship. And this is very important because today in our world, citizenship is a form of exclusion, right? It's a form of supremacy of one part of the working class over other, the underclass, the migrants. So it is used to divide. And in the ancient Roman times, the plebeian class understood that the more plebeian citizens, the more power they would have. So they would include the colonies, right? The places that were conquered by war. The working classes from those peoples were included progressively, making citizenship open and dynamic, right? And giving, the plebeian class the key to this citizenship and making it, as I said, radically open. So what they did not share was this kind of oligarchic identity, right? The identity of the nobles, the all what the nobles were, they were not. And this is something that we need to keep very in mind in today's understanding of class, because we usually focus on what the class shares, but not what it stands against, because this is an agglutinating factor.
Why does the class have to stand against anything?
Ernesto Laclau, when he writes about populism as a way of organizing the political,
why can't you just live life,
constructing the people, this is where he basically draws the line in the antagonistic frontier. And this is something that allows us to organize and has a liberating effect in our conscience in a way, because we can stand against the oppressor in a way. And who is the oppressor, right? So after the revolutions, and I would say after, we come to modernity, and after the legal boundary between nobles and the rest was abolished and was declared obsolete, we immediately became all equal, supposedly, at least in theory, and in practice progressively, at least formally. And there was this legal distinction made very difficult for class formation, because we didn't share really, before it wasn't really legal. You were not noble, so you didn't have access, right? So you were barred from certain posts and from actively participating. So this distinction is abolished, and there's a veil basically that is drawn, and that allows for us to share an illusion that we're all equal, that we're all equal citizens, the billionaires and the rest, right? And then is when, capitalism, and this is the birth of representative democracy as a system in which people are represented, and you don't need class anymore. You have labor parties, but they're like niche in a way in many places, but you can have a more like broad understanding of electoral politics with mass parties, right? And these mass parties are not necessarily class-based parties. So the idea of the working class, as Marx put forward, but basically how it is organized under capitalism, it is really based on labor, as you have said before. It is basically the shop floor. It is, the way the production is structured, what allows for a type of class formation that is centered on labor and the potentiality of this labor to be the revolutionary subject. And here we have a question that I saw in the chat. What about, other classes, the landlords? What about the peasants, right?
You didn't see that
are
in
they
the chat.
Included or not? And we have this discussion very early on in Marxism about the peasantry being not really a revolutionary class, but actually being a conservative class, because they wanted to preserve their autonomy, from the system, to be still in living in this past life, right?
Wow.
And of course, we know that Marx at the end,
not all proletarian are created equal. Some
and
proletarian are more equal than others.
With Bereza Sulich and other radical populists in Russia, basically he was understood that there were other ways to get to, communism or to a more socialized society, right? That the idea that going through capitalism and going through the labor movement and that kind of liberation was not the only path. So for what I want to kind of put forth in this talk is that we need to think about the struggles not as a one-way thing, right? Not about just class or one way of seeing class, but as many struggles that need to be fought in many fronts. And we need to be more dynamic, as Mike said, but also as a composite kind of a struggle, right? That we need to really not impose something that we know from doctrine that should work, and actually try to learn from it's actually working on the ground on many other places, not only in the global north. And this is my other critique, that we are really thinking about class from a very non-representative part of the world, if you will. The majority of people around the world live in a place in which there are more than 50% of the people are work in the informal market. So they are not really part of the working classes. They sell stuff, they make stuff at home. You can say this like small entrepreneurs that are not really, right? You go to the free fairs and you sell and exchange. And this is the majority, at least in Latin America and in Africa, and also Asia, the majority of the labor, or the actual work, not the labor relation, but the actual work and the exchange happens outside of the purview of the state. So I can say for experience, for example, in the 90s until today, Latin America, around 50 to 60% of the population are in the informal market. And the formal workers are really the privileged workers. They are very the people that have a contract, that have all the benefits. They are really in the minority. And in many places, these workers, because they have been in the minority and they are the privileged minority, they have been part of the problem. They have been struggling against change because they fear that they're going to lose their privileges vis-a-vis the others, right? The others are outside. They know how it is outside, so they don't want to be outside. One of the most important, I think, examples was during the President Salvador Allende's rule when he addressed the copper union, the copper miners in Chile, that are really the most privileged working classes in Chile, because they receive in between the salary and the bonuses and everything, right? The level, the socioeconomic, the material level of those workers are always been at the top. So they were part of the unions that were going against Allende, and he goes and his speech says, you need to be in solidarity. You cannot strike right now for better wages when everybody else basically is struggling. This is not about you. And he doesn't win that, that fight. And you see that some labor unions that have become very privileged are part of the oligarchization of power within society. The same happened with Hugo Chavez and the unions of the oil industry. Okay, so they were part of the coup, and they were actually siding with the oligarchy class. So there was no anything progressive about that kind of working class organizing. And the working, and if we're going to see who are the working class, so we can expand, the idea of who is working, what is the working class. If we're going to just reduce it to the wage relation, as Shiver wants to put it, right, then it's very, very narrow. Because we are basically getting all that 50% of the global South population that works informally, that doesn't have an employer, right? Then we are getting out also all the domestic labor. So basically a third or half of the women out there, basically, that labor at their house. And we look at, we theorize about social reproduction in Marxist thought, but we really don't apply it to class. So are these people the working class? We work all the time, right? So if that is really labor, then we really need to take it into account in our understanding of the working class. So we really need to expand the working class. We want to keep using that concept. But I think the people do not define themselves as the working class anymore, because they don't consider what they do as kind of work as the older understanding of work of like 9 to 5, and it's more like making ends meet, basically, and trying to survive. And this new kind of working class, this informal working class that does not have a shop floor to organize, is very heterogeneous from the very beginning, right?
These people really still think America, that everyone is working in a factory.
The most unequal region in the world.
Like,
we have
what century
indigenous
do these people live in?
You have Afro descendants. We have women. We have immigrants from all over the region, right? As the underclass. So it is really a heterogeneity that we need to take into account when we theorize class. So, and when we think about, and I have had these conversations with colleagues that are very enthusiastic about the kind of revolutionary character of unions today, in a way of like this new push of unions that had been dismantled before, but we're coming back. That is great, right? We are all in favor. However, again, if we're going to propose something or theorize something, we cannot do it from the global north. We cannot do it from the center, because again, if the same as we are theorizing democracy or whatever we theorize, if we theorize from the best part of the world, or the most, the most equal part of the world, and we start from there, then it doesn't really apply for the majority of people out there. So I think we really need to shift our focus and theorize from the periphery, from the global south, and from those kinds of experiences in which unions are not really a thing anymore. At least they were in the 70s, but it were not really at the level of Europe. So when we talk about trade unions and labor unions, we really do not have that history and experience today in the global south, at least not as we have in the global north. And we have also the experiences of and we know, because one of the topics here of Mike is the iron law of oligarchy, something that, has keep us together, I think, intellectually, is that unions are also have a problem of oligarchization within. And here I want to put out, the new labor struggle in the UK, which is, really, it has been a struggle from within, because we have the representatives trying to get away with stuff that is not conducive to radicalization, but actually to appeasement. They have been using, for example, e-ballots to push agendas that come from employers that are more conservative, and selling them as something that is good, and forcing people, or forcing to say, hey, vote immediately, it's great, without any time for deliberation, for really getting together in the,
they're
in
accusing the conservatives in the UK of rigging
kind of
the union elections
as a way of
Isn't
validating themselves,
ironclad law of vote
bypassing
projection in action right now.
Debasing
they're accusing people of stealing elections. So it's a
struggle within and without that we need to look at very closely, and not kind of idealize the trade union, labor union movement today, that is really small compared to the kind of a global outlook, and has a lot of faults. And
Great
also,
point,
if you think about trade unions and labor unions in the future, today we have the increase of AI, and the chat GPT and all this, all these bots that are threatening very fast
AI.
To
replacing
to
the worker.
All our business, basically.
Exactly.
That all our works.
You will have no job.
Our jobs could be fulfilled.
You will have no job, and you will be happy. This is why they really.
So
want
what
socialism.
is the working class at the end if we're not working, right? So if the capitalists don't need us anymore, or need us a small percentage of us, what happens to the rest? So if we're going to only give the working class as the kind of the people that are employed as the revolutionary subjects, and the rest are just consumers that are basically like the lumpen proletariat. So now all of us are in this kind of like more reactionary category. This is not really helpful, right? And finally, about labor unions is also that they could be easily weaponized. So again, with this idea of divide and conquer that Will was bringing, it's very easy to exploit, precarity and the conservative ethos of, let's conserve the job because there's threatening forces outside. We're good. The other people are in a precarious situation. We don't want to be with them in a way. Just something very recent that happened in Chile now. We have a lot of salmon industry in the kind of glaciers and Patagonia places, as a very sanctuaries of nature. And they have had the salmon industry from the Norwegians, right? And it's contaminating everything. And there's a new law coming out that is going to regulate the future, going to prohibit any future industry in those places, but it's not going to affect the industry that is already there. So the industry immediately mobilized their workers, saying, this law is going to close your jobs, which is not true. It's going to close the shop. So we need to, go against it. And yesterday there was a massive demonstration, and they basically bussed all their workers from the salmon industry to protest against this new legislation that will conserve the environment, basically. And this is something that we see that is short-termism, that is this individualism, self-interest, that goes against their own interests in the long run, because basically everything will be polluted. So we need to deal with a sociological subject, that is neoliberal. We all have been indoctrinated into neoliberalism. We're all consumers.
Yes,
and therefore
neoliberalism is the real problem
against that. And this is what we need to be thinking about. The structures that Will was talking about. What are the structures in order to have a concept of class and an organization?
Not really. It's been a relatively uneventful day. First guy was really the most interesting.
Not only to organize and emancipate ourselves in the local, but also at the global level, because this is a global fight, right? So we need to think another way of universalizing that is not really homogeneity, right? And finally, so to go into a more a kind of positive, and to wrap it up, the understanding of class, what it should be. So if we should not think about class as a kind of a reduction, just that it refers only to the working class, those in contract, right? That it has this employer-employee relation. We need to think about this class as a more as a status thing. So as a position in society. This is what I'm arguing. There was another question in the chat about the middle class. Where's the middle class here, right? And the middle class has always been kind of a buffer, right? From Aristotle on, the idea that you need to kind of a buffer class that has property, that has a lot of the stake in the system, that will conserve the system. Of course, the middle class almost only exists in Europe at this point. Like the middle class has shrunk very much. And it's just also a construction, right? It's the idea that everybody's middle class. Everybody wants to be middle class because the working class has been kind of denigrated as a concept, or you don't want to be part, or you want to be, an entrepreneur, right? All this kind of aspirational ideas of class.
It's very
and I think
easy,
we need to think about class as a wider concept, that it would it's not the 99%, because the 10% is a problem. So I would say 90% is not like a very good slogan, but it has to be a more expansive understanding of class based on this de facto second-class citizenship that has a different configuration depending on the place, right, that we're looking at. So the different structures, and again, we cannot just say, oh, we are all it's the same. No, because there are different structures in different places. So indigeneity, for example, and the way that we treat class and indigeneity in Latin America is very specific and has to be addressed in the specific context. So I think we need to think about more as a contextual thinking of class that is abstract enough to be transported, but it needs to be grounded. And it needs to be, of course, understood as against oligarchy, for me at least. That there's something that the Occupy gave us, not only the 99%, for me the most important one was the 1%, the talk about oligarchy, a concept that was ditched before, right? We didn't talk about that, 15 years ago when we were in that seminar. Oligarchy was a strange word. And, after Occupy and Bernie, at least, people were talking about it. And today we can say that the billionaire class, it should not exist. And therefore, there is something that we can organize.
The millionaires and the billionaires just became the billionaires,
right? Into a more a kind of a front to
even she took Bernie's talking
the world
points
from catastrophe and to abolish capitalism in the process of saving the planet. Because I think the specific fights the environmental fight specifically will allow for a lot of organizing the kind of mere employer relationships will not. It doesn't have that reach. And for thinking about and for kind of having a more normative understanding to class, we need to think about space. We need to think about the new shop floor. What is our new shop floor? Because there's no really organizing on social media. There's no virtual organizing. There's very little. There has limits in a way. So we need to think about the space for cognitive liberation. So first of all, the
cognitive liberation is in the head first.
The awakening that I think the Chilean people had during the uprising in 2019, that the awakening to this kind of neoliberal structure in which you are a subaltern subject in a way, that you need to kind of crack, rip the veil and see it first. And for that, you need to do it together. It needs to be achieved together, and therefore you need a space to assemble. And I want to very briefly go into Marx's thought on the dynamism of the order. As you may recall, Marx's dissertation, PhD dissertation, was on Epicurus and Democritus, and Epicurean thought, and he was very keen into understanding what we call the swerve or the Kleinemann, this idea that you have an inexplicable swerve within the system of regularities. That you have energies that go, you have emotions that are determined, but then you have something that cannot be explained. And for Marx, Epicurus was the first scientist of freedom, basically, of free will. And I think this is what we need to have at the base of our thinking about class, and the structures and the space that will house this, interaction in order to create this class consciousness that doesn't exist today. It needs to accommodate the swerve. It needs to accommodate a dynamic way of looking at the world that has built-in rules and procedures that would allow for diversity and heterogeneity to be celebrated, and not to impose a form of a revolution that is, for example, patriarchal, right? Or there's other forms of domination within it, because we need to understand that the working classes or the plebeian people are not good in themselves in a way. We're just humans. We have been indoctrinated into a system of dominations that are through caste, through gender, through ethnicities, and we're all indoctrinated into this. We need to dismantle this. So these spaces not only need to create class consciousness through solidarity and through the recognition of something that is shared, this shared form of oppression, but also being able to dismantle the different forms of structural domination that we have internalized, a la Hegel, right? We have internalized and we don't even see them anymore, right? And we know this among our comrades. We have, a male problem in general in the revolutionary history. Women have taken the lead in all revolutions. From the Russian Revolution would not be possible if you go and read the history of the Russian Revolution. The first pages was, as you remind us with this course, that the women were on the forefront, and the same happened with the Paris Commune and other places in which women were prominent. However, we don't study that and we don't value that, so we need to go back and kind of try to unearth the new way. So what are the new ways today? Where are the spaces today? And the spaces are in the margins. We cannot look at the center. We are not going to find that in the center, I would say. We find evidence that radical spaces of deliberation and decision-making are producing a metaphysical change in people. We have the evidence from citizen assemblies around the world that people that engage in deliberation in the citizen assemblies selected by lottery have a change in their identity, and they have a change even in their mood. They have been tracked, and there's something that changed in them, that they were empowered and they felt that they were, political actors for once in their lives. And then they go back to their private lives and then get really depressed. So part of the, the theorists and the people that do this, citizen assembly stuff, they want to make it permanent because it's something that people want to keep, happening to themselves. So I think we need to take that and be able to think about spaces creatively in which we have a new shop floor for people that are not really engaged in wage labor, but they have a reason to be together and exchange and organize. And for that, we have examples in the global south of radical spaces of emancipation, like soup kitchens, like free fairs, like housing committees, that basically are aimed not only at a specific thing, for material change in the locality, but have a more macro view, because they understand that
a radical
the
form
struggles
of
are not
emancipation?
Individual, they're not sectorial, but they are really global. So this is where we need to be looking at into how we can we think about a class as a concept that would allow us to turn consumers into political agents in a way, and how can we kind of use an old concept with new meaning in order to organize for the 21st century. Thank you.
She said a whole lot of word salad, but she has some interesting ideas that are not at all grounded in reality.
That was great.
Oh, good. Sean's back. The best looking of all socialists.
If we can start off, we're getting a ton of questions in the chat over Twitter, Facebook, etc. I'm going to start putting these in for you all, but I'm curious if you all would like to respond to each other a little bit first, maybe starting with Mike and going to Will and Camilla. Is that all right? Great.
Yeah, that works for me. I have maybe 3 little reactions to. It's also funny you mentioned the Michelles. I remember that seminar, having just read The Iron Law of Oligarchy. I think I brought it up maybe in every single session. What about the Iron Law of Oligarchy was my refrain. I imagine that was pretty annoying by the end, so I apologize. Yeah, I have just like 3 reactions. Like, I thought this was extremely useful, and I got a lot out of both your presentations.
I did not think this was useful at all, but it was better than that economics one we did last week.
This comment about what about other classes, and I just want to. How I think about that question is it depends on what you want class to try to explain. Like, what are you trying to do with the concept? And I think that there are certain things that we can use a very abstract workers versus capitalist way of thinking about class. There are very useful reasons to have that. Like, we can get sort of like the basic dynamics of the capitalist mode of production with a very abstract understanding of class, right? And so there are certain kinds of things that I think certain types of ways of thinking about class better lend themselves to. In my view, if you're going to think about class formation, if you're going to think about class politics, it's a complete mistake to start from that abstract view. An extremely abstract view tells us a lot about sort of the broad dynamics of a mode of production. We can get a lot out of thinking about feudalism with just a simple peasants and serfs and lords and knights kind of view, but it tells us so little, and it's so thin when it comes to politics. And it's at that level that I think it's much more necessary to have a much more conjunctural, maybe even a social formation view of class, which brings into view not just other classes, middle classes or peasantry, small business, informal, but also fractions within classes, and that to me is it's how you think about class depends on what you want class to explain. I don't think there's one answer to that problem. It depends on what you want the concept to do for you. I had two quick reactions. I really like Will's kind of point about, well, maybe political primacy if we're thinking proletarian, and if we have a more expansive view. And I'm totally sympathetic to that, and I want to just like wholeheartedly agree with you. I have 2 reasons why I might not wholeheartedly agree with you. One reason, which is kind of like a flippant, well, I was just kind of going off how they use class, and so I wanted to accept their argument on their own terms. The second reason is I actually think there might be justification for defining class in a narrower work relations way, and that's because, well, this is the move I see the class abstractionists doing. I see them narrowing the definition of class to a work relation, which you really brilliantly show in your piece, and I agree is wrong, but then expanding the causal significance of that work relation in sort of capitalism more general. I disagree with the expanding of the causal significance, but I might agree with the narrowing of the definition. Because I think that when we think about class in terms of work relations, which we might actually define more expansively than just employer work,
to include what other types of work
as a work relation.
Oh, family, biological family.
I think when we think about it in a more narrow sense, it allows us to bring
women are being exploited because of their labor and their unpaid labor in the home.
Work relations, citizenship, non-work gender relations and sexual relations, race relations,
do you
and other social structures that sort of go beyond those, and to sort of integrate them into our analysis for how class formation and class politics works as well. So I have a kind of maybe like a pragmatist kind of approach. Maybe it's just better to be narrower because it helps us think a little more clearly about like how these different things intersect. But that's that again is a lot way similar to how I think about class in general. It's much less about what the truth is and much more about like how do we actually get better understandings of how the world works, kind of thing. And I also want to just make one quick point, and I don't want to take up a lot of time. I really liked, Camilla, your point about class not simply being economically structured, but also politically structured. I think that is totally on point here. I mean, it's so right, and it's so there's so much of this debate which misses the point that it's that class politics and class interest and sort of class movements, don't simply arise out of like this untapped energy, right? They actually have to be created with actual institutions.
You're
and
correct.
Politics.
You have to spin
not simply
people up to convince them that they're oppressed, so that they rise up against the oppressors that you invented. Exactly.
That could be unions. It might be political parties. It could be sort of new constitutionally made bodies. In the sort of kind of the way you talk about it, the work that I do around sort of democratizing finance, I think that actually public financial institutions could serve this role if there was a way in which there was an oversampling of working class participants in different sort of commissions that help drive mandates for how public investment works. And I guess I would just say that like that to me is such a crucial part, because without that political institutional articulation of class, we are left with this highly differentiated class politics, right? That is the way in which a differentiated working class can articulate a common class program and a common class perspective. There is no common class perspective without that political articulation and without the creation of those new institutions, right? There isn't sort of like a thoroughly working class current that's just been abandoned by the Democrats or the Republicans that just needs to be tapped. It has to be actually created. After decades of disorganization and atomization, it needs to be actually literally created through political institutions. So I think that, I just want to echo that point, because I think it's fundamental. Like, class is not simply an economically structured phenomenon. Like, when we come to when we're talking about politics, it's entirely a politically structured phenomenon. Like, when it's solely economically structured, class has no political articulation,
because you structured it and convinced people of it to gain power and to destabilize the system. Exactly. Thank you, Will.
And so I think Mike, I just thought that point was really well made.
Mike likes to say the quiet part out loud. He does it quite readily.
You're muted, so I'm going to go. So yeah, one thing that I wanted to bring is that in Latin America, we use the word pobladores. And this is the people, lower classes that I used to identify more with the working classes. We're more like residence-based. We're pobladores. We are the people who reside here. We occupy the space in a way. And it has to do with, the material experience of that,
Mike is definitely the most interesting
that
of
position.
The
and it doesn't have to do with, work. So this is something to think of, like what is the translation in other languages and how it is used, right? Because we have this discussion about, freedom in that in the Leuven conference, Will, about, if freedom is actually a word that is used by the movements and is not really used in the movements. So it's something that is in theory, theories of liberty, but it's not really used in the actual discourse in a way, at least not in the language, in the Spanish language. One thing that I wanted to react, and I am disappointed, Mike, that you didn't address it, because I already did. I already asked this question back when you presented this paper at the Historical Materialism Conference. That is this homogenizing and specializing, at the same time, experience of labor. Because labor divide us, and this is the example that I brought that time about, the Deliveroo worker, that has the same experience of exploitation and oppression in California or Hong Kong or, you know, Chile, you know, and this is a even if the working class is very divided, the experience within that division could be, you know, it is across borders. And there is a solidarity that comes with it that also needs to be constructed. So I think here also we need to, this is something, a concept that the same as class, solidarity has come back as a concept, but we don't really know what it means in a way. Because we in our you know, neoliberal marketized brain is all about exchange. It's like you know, you give me this, I give you that, reciprocity, but it's not reciprocity. Solidarity is actually to give without asking for anything in return, for not even knowing if I ever going to be repaid. Is as someone said in the chat, nurses support Medicare for all, even if it would mean lower wages for them or stagnant wages, because they know that it's the right thing to do.
And that's
so
stupid.
In a way, solidarity means that
solidarity means you give of yourself, you know, for other people altruistically, even though you know you will suffer more in the long run.
Beyond that, right? So it's something that also we need to think about. What is the ethos or the ethics that come out of this new idea of class that is more expansive, that is grounded on material experience and life experience of oppression, that includes the diverse, you know, the intersectional, you know, forms of oppression. Go, Will. I'm sorry that I jumped the line. We still cannot hear you. You're still out. No. Some technical difficulties. No?
Okay, let's try this.
Yes.
There we go.
Oh.
Now.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason in the middle there, somehow the computer decided that my headphones had a microphone. So it's, but they don't. So anyways, that was confusing. Okay. So thank you both for all of that. I guess I feel like I would just want to say maybe two things. Partly about like my, I mean, part of my attraction, why I like insisting on the language of the proletariat, is because I think that, so I think the proletariat is absolutely, like, it's very abstract. Like we are, as you said, Mike, like if we're talking about the proletariat, we're talking about like the most sort of abstract structural model of capitalism.
How?
That Marx gives us, right? It's just people who have no reserve and are dependent upon wages for life, even if they don't have immediate access to a wage labor, right? And I like that.
Oh, right. They don't think there's any middle class. Right.
I mean, for some of the reasons that I think came out in Camila's presentation, like it directs us to the overwhelming majority of the people on this globe who are not members of unions, who are not part of a classically localized workforce, but who are absolutely, I mean, Marx says it in Capital, they're the essential product of the capitalist mode of production. So I like insisting on that precisely because it directs us away from where things are easy. And I think it highlights the problems that we have to face. So I like that about it. And I think that then the follow-up question to that is, I think, Camilla's question, which is, where's the new shop floor? And I think that's a great question.
What's the answer, Will?
There are a lot of people who have influenced me a great deal who, would argue that the new shop floor, insofar as there is a new shop floor, is the streets, right?
The streets.
That the new shop floor is not the site of production at all, but the new shop floor, the place where we come together, and the place
streets.
where
you guys, does anyone think that these elitist Ivy League professors have ever been in the streets?
Let
me do a poll.
The site where the proletariat directly confronts
these
the repressive apparatus of
professors
the police and the state.
Ever been in?
I certainly think that I've been greatly influenced by people who say that, and I think there's a lot to that. But the last thing I want to say is that I don't go all in for that either, because just an anecdote that I've shared before, but there's a great episode of the Dig podcast from a couple years back. It was on Striketober, right? And Gabe Wynand was hosting it, and he had Alex Press and Jonah Furman on to talk about striking. And then they had an activist, an organizer from
it does give you some faith that these people are never going to be successful, and then you remind yourself that they're winning, and it's like, oh God, these are the people we're losing to.
That IATSE was
we're going to organize in the street, guys.
Alex Press asked this activist, whose name I'm blanking on at the moment, so I apologize to him for forgetting his name. But Alex asked him, what was it that made things change within the union? Because there were things that had been part of the contract for a long time. In particular, they were talking about like a 10-hour turnaround time. Like if you got off work, then there was 10 hours before you would be expected back on work. And that had been fine for a long time. That had been part of negotiated contracts. And now suddenly it wasn't. Now the union members wanted a longer turnaround.
I had to ask.
They didn't want just 10 hours to race back home and try to get some sleep and food and then show back up to work. And Alex was pressing him, like, what made that change? And he said, well, okay, there were three things. There was the Bernie campaign.
Do you know what they mean by
that got people,
the proletariat organized in the streets? There was
Black Lives Matter, and there was us going out in the street.
See,
and then we had a diversity sort of working group within the union that brought together people of color to deal with diversity issues within the union. Now, and he said those are the three things. And I think that sort of pluralism of like, okay, here you have like an electoral politics thing that pressed a social democratic line. You have street action around police violence. You have diversity and inclusion initiatives within the union, and you have labor militancy. And those things all feed into one another. And so that, I think that's closer to how I think about these things. That we shouldn't think that there is like one privileged site where political mobilization and labor mobilization is going to come from, but rather people are going to get moving in different ways. And the question is, how do those ways in which people are moving build on one another, and how can we support that? And I think that's where solidarity comes in for me. So I thank you, Camilla, for bringing that up.
94% of you think that none of these people have ever been in the streets.
And I think the articulation of different sites, there's no primacy of one site, and the sites are contextual, right? So in a way, how can we articulate and connect those sites, and kind of their independence or autonomy or particularity is preserved in a way, and there's no homogenizing again drive right onto what is truth or what is the correct way, but actually how to kind of preserve that decentralized way of organization that is localized, because it is the shop floors need to be on the ground where people actually meet, right?
Yeah, and this is a bit related to your disappointment with me, Camila. The point about how we think through the political implications of the fact that, let's just call it proletarianization, homogenizes workers in key ways, but also specializes. I think like my read, I guess how I would at least how I would articulate it, it's that the homogenizing experience of being a proletarian or a worker or whatever word you want to use, that market competition relation that puts you into competition with not just those that hire you or those that are sort of gaining advantage from your work, but also competition that others might others within your own class. That homogenizing experience actually generates differentiation. It generates political differentiation. Like there's a structural homogeny or a structural similarity that actually generates political differentiation, and the creation of new subjective bases to make political demands and that might be demands for recognition, but it might also be redistributive demands. And so, I mean, this kind of gets, I think, to the point Will was just making about sort of building on and supporting different sort of movements within the working class, within the proletariat class, as a means of creating solidarity. Because I think there's this kind of view out there. I mean, I don't know if anybody actually just downright articulates it, but it's a bit of a sense, isn't it? That well, the problem is that we're focusing on all of these kind of not class things, and we really need to get at the heart of it. We really need to get at the heart of the employer capital labor kind of relation, and we need to get at sort of these working class things that happen at work, that happen because that's where workers' interests lie. That's where, and not only that's where workers' interests lie, that's where power lies through the leverage of the strike and all this. But I think
that's where power lies. The first goal of the woke left is what? Gain as much power as possible. That's where power lies, through the leverage of the strike.
The working class is this highly differentiated group of people that include all sorts of people at different income levels, different places in the world, different employment situations. Some are in sort of extremely oppressed situations. Others have it pretty good. Right? They're decent middle class lives, and it includes a wide swath of difference. And within that swath, there's going to be wide different range of things that people find proximately important to their lives, and that people want to agitate and fight over. And some of those things they're not going to articulate as working class demands. They're not going to articulate as like, this is what I want as a worker. I mean, it's such a strange way of thinking about politics. Yet, regardless of what they articulate it as, like, it's part and parcel of their experience as working class people. And so I think the way to sort of build on and support a working class movement
is he upset that like working class people don't have the same perception
in working class movements. Not to sort of say, well, if only it was.
They have to intervene in the working class movement.
It doesn't quite hit all the criteria that I have in my mind for what genuine socialist politics look like. I mean, that to me just seems like it's a recipe for self-marginalization or maybe selling books. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to me actual socialist politics. And so I guess that's how I would intervene. Like the homogenization process to me is part and parcel of political differentiation, and it sort of lays down for us as socialists sort of the task of intervening in working class politics wherever that is in the world that we actually live in, not in sort of like the world that we wish we lived in. So I guess that's how I would kind of respond to that. Sorry I disappointed you, by the way.
No. It was just.
You didn't disappoint me, Mike. You were everything I was hoping you would be.
I would I'm just going to throw in a couple things very quickly, just because there are a bunch of questions in the chat that we didn't address.
It's almost like Mike has never interacted with the working class.
Questions that I didn't address, but maybe I don't know. Maybe we can address those in some
I would like you to address the one about like, have you ever actually been in the streets?
Somebody asked about the landowner class, and I think that's actually I'll just recommend, maybe they already know about this, but like I think there's a very strong essay by Francesca Manning on the landowner class in historical materialism, not the most recent issue, but a couple of issues ago, that tackles that well. And I would just say that, yeah, that's like, obviously, you know, I focused on a very abstract and very simplified notion of capitalist class. And I think Mike is right that you have to pick the level of abstraction. But I do think that Manning makes a strong case for thinking that even at the highest level of abstraction, you have to include the landowning class in that structural analysis. So I think that's worth checking out. Anything else? I mean, we're at time, so I don't know.
Have you ever been in the street with the proletariat?
Like, impressive.
Exactly.
Well done, everybody. Thank you for that. And your timeliness, of course. Remarkable stuff. Thanks for everybody who came to watch.
Thank you, Sean.
If you had more questions or found yourself wanting more, you know, we have a lot of stuff that you can watch.
Oh, we want more, baby.
Reach out to us.
We do.
Come hang out with us. All sorts of things with Red May. Anyway, we want to thank Camila and Will and Mike for joining us today. It was just an outstanding conversation, and we're really grateful, as always, to have you all with us, and hope to have you back in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about how not to talk about class. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Well, I guess.
Have a good Saturday.
Hang on. Oh, there they go. I guess that's all we have for the moment. Now, that was a little bit more of a dry presentation. It wasn't as bad as last week's. We did get some golden nuggets out of it, I think, but nothing, nothing crazy. I mean, it was a little like way academic. And I think it's one of the things that's one of the things that I hear from socialists who come on the channel quite a bit is like, Carlin, why are you talking about race and sexual orientation? Because Marx is just about class, Carlin. That's all Marx is. Marx is just about class. It doesn't have anything to do with race at all. And I say to them, well, you guys have changed the definitions of things. And then they go, no, we haven't. It's just about class. Well, in that presentation, Mike, the Marxist professor who works at Marquette University, and he edits a journal called Critical Sociology, Mike made the argument that race is the same thing as class, that gender is the same thing as class, that all of the other identity politics categories need to be considered the same kind of like idea as class in Marxism, because you can't just look at class anymore. You have to look at the whole lived experience and that sort of thing. So to all of the socialists who keep trying to get me on that one, I just heard one of your professors explaining to you that race and class are the same thing so far as we're concerned. Gender and class are the same thing. There are oppressors and there are oppressed, and that is it. And we can look at it by the different structures of categorization. They also can't even define what proletariat is. They had like 3 different definitions in that presentation, and they were kind of like, well, the definition I think they settled on is the proletariat is someone who relies on a wage for work. They seem to think that all people still work in factories, which, I mean, some people work in factories. Factories are like a thing, they exist, but the vast majority of workers, and quite frankly, the vast majority of like wage earning workers that would fit under their definition of proletariat, being that they rely on a wage to like survive within the evil capitalist system, The vast majority of those people don't work in factories. Like, that's not a thing anymore. Maybe it is in the global South, which is just South America, which is what Camilla wanted to keep arguing. But that's not a thing. And so I don't know why socialists keep pretending that factories are like the major place where most proletariat go to work, because that's like provably not true. Anyway, guys, so a little bit of like I gotta be honest, I'm gonna have to get at least 2 more cups of coffee, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a little bit of a break, but Socialism Saturday is not over yet. Socialism Saturday has just begun, and we are going to gather together in 2 hours at 6 p.m. And this is going to be a good one, guys. You're not going to want to miss this, even if you have to pop in and out. We are going to do a queer Marxism marathon. I have 3 craft beers left in my fridge. I will keep going until my craft beer runs out. And as you guys know, I actually do drink very slowly when I'm doing it on stream. I only had 1 beer yesterday during happy hours, like a 3-hour stream. We could be streaming queer Marxism all night. I have a whole long list of presentations that I want to watch. And listen, I'm going to just make a confession. The reason that we're doing a queer Marxism marathon is that I want to review. I personally just want to watch some of this stuff. And I kind of think that if I'm watching socialism on the internet, I might as well do it with friends. And you know, we need to be the ones to teach the conservative Twitterati what this stuff actually is, because God knows they're not going to do it on their own. And I want to look for like clips that we can make to show people exactly what. So this is a working session, okay? I want everyone come prepared to be serious, prepared to identify the best clips, prepared to entertain ourselves when it gets boring through the boring bits and the cringy bits, because that's what we do on Socialism Saturday. We watch the entire thing. It will be the most dystopian stream you've seen all week. If you think you understand queer Marxism, oh no, honey, no. I'm going to introduce you to a whole new world that you never knew existed. This is just one step below Abolish the Family on the most dystopian meter. And we're going to go all night long, ladies and gentlemen, all night long. Autumn, I hope you can join us for queer Marxism later as our resident socialist. All right, guys, that's all I have for right now. Of course, please make sure that you have mounted that like button. Please make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you are not already. And please make sure you're subscribed to my Substack. I do hope to bang out a Substack article that I've been working on between now and when the stream starts in a couple of hours. I do have a couple phone calls to make, so I might not get to that entirely, but I'm going to give it a try. But definitely subscribe at Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com for all of my best and most dystopian unwoke content. We'll see you guys in a couple hours for the official Socialism Saturday. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.